never occurred to me that I'd be anywhere near the wrestling business. I always enjoyed it. I watched it in Detroit growing up. When I moved to Pittsburgh, I was a big fan of wrestling in Pittsburgh. I moved to Minneapolis and still continue to watch it. And that was where some of my most vivid, recollections of wrestling, took place when I was a kid. Greg had flown all these people in, and they're waiting and waiting and waiting, and there's no Larry. And it became apparent that there was an issue. And I don't know whose idea it was. I think it was Greg's. He said, well, Eric's here. He's a good-looking guy. He's a model. He did commercials, and he's got a tie on. I think I was the only person in the building that actually had a tie at the time. And because I feel so strongly about them personally and for what they've done for my family. But Vern, if you cut through all the obvious things that went wrong towards the end, and you look at the things that went right, not only for Vern and for that territory, but for so many people that had the opportunity to come through that territory and learn from Vern. And so many of them did, including Hulk Hogan, Kurt Hennig, Sergeant Slaughter, so many people of that era, and so many more that I can't.
Lex Luger?
Never really liked Lex Luger, even when I first met him.
Why is that?
He just rubbed me wrong. He just, and sometimes it's
a lot of people say that, though.
Well, a lot of people say that about me too, and they make an assumption about me that isn't really true, not necessarily just because of the way my eyes are set or something. I always look pissed off, and it's not true. And Lex had that same kind of character or charisma about him. He had a look about him and the way he carried himself. He communicated arrogance when he might not have really been feeling it, but that's how he took it. And that's how I took it when I first met him. He was a very arrogant guy to me at that time. And he was the one guy that I just kind of, people talk about the mismanagement of WCW in the early 90s and why that was. You got to put everything into context. Ted Turner bought a bankrupt company that was already mismanaged and dysfunctional. It was in bankruptcy, for Christ's sake.
Right.
So, and that was, I think, in 1988 or 1989. When you buy something that's broken and you try to fix it with many of the people that were responsible for breaking it in the first place, the transition from the Crockett's to Turner Broadcasting, yes, they had television, and that solves a lot of problems. But television is one component of a very complex maze of, or a kaleidoscope of things that all have to fit together in order to work. And it took a couple of years, 2, 3, 4 years, to figure it out. And they went through a lot of management. They tried a couple different things. And in retrospect, did it take them 5 years to turn it around? 6 years? Yeah, but it's quite an accomplishment in many respects. They were a national television network that had a very regional nucleus. Their product at that time, while they were trying to appeal to an audience in Los Angeles and New York and Chicago and the big television markets that are critical to a national television rating, they were trying to do so with a very regionalized product that was great for the Southeast, but didn't really speak the same cultural language and meet the expectation of the audience in New York or LA. So that was one hurdle. It's one of the reasons that my tenure in that company started out as controversially, especially with talent, as it did, is because the first thing I did was shut down the house shows. That's why Bob Dew and I didn't really see eye to eye, quite frankly, because we were doing 140 or 150 or 180 house shows a year, and when you sat down and analyzed the financials on that, you look at each one and go, wait a minute, every time we go out the door, we're losing money. And you want to fix that by going out the door more. How the fuck does that work? How hard is it to get attention when you're a second in a two-company race? That's a good question. It's a good way to put the question. Again, go back, put it in context. We were not only number 2, we were number 2 by about 1.5 miles. If it was a horse race, they would have shot the number 2 horse a long time ago. And that was the biggest challenge, is how do you overcome that? How do you, because brought in Hulk, now people started really believing in it. So they started giving me a little bit more rope. Well, now they gave me the money to bring in Gene. Then they gave me the money to bring in Bobby. And with each one of those acquisitions, the ratings started getting bigger, the pay-per-views started growing, the arenas started filling up again. So of course my budget started getting bigger. But it was a slow process. It wasn't like this golden ATM card. Ric Flair was critical. And I probably couldn't have, I don't want to say, that might be a little too strong. I doubt that I would have been able to sign Hulk Hogan without Ric Flair's help. You know, Hulk was a smart guy. Hulk knew in order for him to have the kind of impact that coming to WCW was going to have on him, he needed to be working with the right guy and somebody that he could trust and somebody, quite frankly, that would make him look good. And he knew Ric Flair. Of everybody on our roster, Ric Flair would make him look good. Perspectives with absolutely no baggage whatsoever. And I could be honest about things that I otherwise probably 10 or 15 years ago wouldn't have been quite as honest about, and so could he. But the other part of it was we were able to really look at it in its context. Steve was kind of half pissed off half the time. You know, he wanted something more. All those focus was on Hogan. He wanted to do something different, and he had a chip on his shoulder half the time. And in Steve's own words, you know, hell, I would have done the same thing you did. You know, he wouldn't have said that 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but he understands it now because we can each look at it from our respective perspectives. But did I regret at that time letting him go? Absolutely not, because I knew why I did it. And I would do it today. Under the same circumstances, I would have done it today, because even today, nobody's got 20/20 hindsight. At the time I did it, Steve didn't know he was going to go on to become Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Right.
There was like no magic shining diamond in the rough there. He hit. I relied on Dusty a lot creatively in the very beginning, but there was a lot of baggage there, you know, between him and Flair and emotion and ego, and it became too much of a burden. And Ted looked at me and said, "Oh, Mark. Oh, what do we got to do to make this thing competitive with Vince McMahon?" I was here to pitch China. I don't have a fucking clue what to do to compete with the WWF. He didn't say Vince McMahon, he said
Right.
WWF. I was not ready for that. And my first reaction, you know, I used to fight a lot and box and kickboxing and all that. My first reaction is, you know, when you're getting your ass kicked, the first thing you do is tuck your chin and put your fists up, you know. Don't get beat up anymore. So and mentally I'm going, okay, I got to tuck my chin and figure this fucker out before he asks me another question. And I said, well, he's in prime time. We're at 6 o'clock on a Saturday night, 3 o'clock Saturday afternoon on the West Coast. So the only way we could be competitive is if we were in prime time. It's logical. It wasn't bullshit. I thought, okay, I'm off the hook. And he looked right over. Scott Sessa there was me, Ted sitting where you are. I'm sitting directly across from Ted. Harvey Schiller's to my right. Scott Sassa is immediately to Schiller's right. Ted looked over at Scott Sassa. Didn't even comment. He said, "Scott, give Eric 2 hours every night, Monday night on TNT." Scott's jaw dropped. My heart stopped. I don't know. I literally made a list on a yellow legal pad. Their tape, we're live. You know, they're family, kitty, comic book type characters. I don't mean that derisively, but they're appealing to kids. You know, they're selling ice cream cones. We're gonna go for 18 to 34-year-old males. Just broke down everything that they did well, and then I tried to figure out, okay, well, if they're doing that, I can't beat them at that. How do I do this?
Dean Malenko.
Yeah, Benoit, Malenko, and Guerrero. That was another very specific. There was a reason I brought those guys in, and he left WCW shortly after I was really involved too much, and then after he left in the ECW thing, I became the mortal enemy and the catalyst for everything that he was doing, according to people that used to work there at the time. And he said a lot of things about me that weren't true, which kind of reinforced the earlier perception I had of him. It's like, God, I was right about it. I mean, he's kind of a sleazebag. But, subsequently I got to know Paul when I went to work at WWE, and we got along fine. I respect him now. I mean, it's easy to look back 20 years now and make judgments, but now I respect him for. And then when Scott became available, and ultimately Kevin, it started to click for me. And one of the things that clicked was the reality of the situation. Now, I'm not going to lie to you or anybody else and say that I didn't want to walk that fine line of making it look like they were from WWE, but that wasn't the real motivator. The real motivator was both Scott and Kevin had worked at WCW before, felt that they were misused, mistreated, and abused, went over to WWF to become big stars, and now they were coming back to extract their revenge. That's it. He threw me out of his house.
What was his reasoning?
Just didn't want to do it. His response to me was, I'll never forget, I make jokes about it with him now, but it's like, as I'm pitching, he's doing this, stroking his Fu Manchu. I got done pitching and he's still stroking his Fu Manchu. Brother, I gotta pick the kids up from school. Thanks for coming by. You'll never know my character until you walk a mile in my yellow boots. I knew I had heat. I've always had heat. I had heat the minute I stepped into this business. For Vern, I had heat. And clearly by that time, I had a ton of heat. So it wasn't like a giant fucking leap to go, well, wait a minute, why don't I turn because it was part of the story. I was the president of WCW, legitimately, and as a character, it was and it's not at all what was laid out. It was the longest, most painful live in-ring segment I have ever done in my life. It was written to be about 7 to 10 minutes long. It might have gone 25 minutes, and it went all over the place. And all of a sudden now he's being asked to do things, and he's got this guy over here in his ear telling him one thing, and he's got this guy over here telling him one thing, and he's got to deal with me who's telling him one thing. And all of a sudden, you mix all that shit into one bucket, and you got nitroglycerin. And that's what it was like working with Bill. Now, if Bill had been in the business for 10 or 15 years, this person over here wouldn't have had that much influence, or this person. Or he could have looked at me and said, dude, you're full of shit. I want to do this instead.
Right.
But he didn't have that foundation to kind of cut through the bullshit. So he had to, it manifest. I'm not blaming Brett 100%. I think he was a big part of it. Did I come up with the best idea in the world for Brett? No. But did I have a talent that was able to help deliver anything close to that? No. Brett would show up half an hour before a show. And he was literally, when I was like, God, he's depressed. It's like, you gotta participate. You gotta be in the game.
Right.
You can't just walk in an hour before the show and go, what do you got for me? And go, oh, really? I'm gonna do that? And then expect that anything magic is gonna happen out there. You're a performer, you're a wrestler, you're an actor, you're a singer. You've got to feel the passion for it. And if you don't, regardless of what I write on a piece of paper, it's not going to really matter, for a better term. He said, Eric, I need to ask you to go home. I said, Harvey, I can't go home. I got a pay-per-view on Sunday. Just, no, you don't. Didn't sink in immediately. I thought he was just trying to be a friend. Because we had that, I don't want to say mentor, father-son thing, because we weren't that close. But I knew he had my back. He always had my back. Glad it was supposed to end. But the idea was that Hulk was going to quit, leave with the belt. We were going to create we've got to create a new champion. It was going to be a heel that comes out at Halloween Havoc. And instead of having that match with the heel, that's when Hulk, the heel and whatever the babyface was, Hulk was going to be as a surprise.
Right.
And we're going to do that match. So that was some version of that, more finely tuned, but that was the idea. And everybody liked that. And after having had the conflict with Vince, after having had the conference call with the president of the network, we all agreed what we were going to do. Part of that storyline was when Hulk got pissed off and left, he left the building and I left with him. I knew instantly who it was. I clearly recognized his voice. And hey, Eric. How you doing, pal? Great, Vince.
Have you talked to Vince over the years? Before then?
Not before then, no. I had never talked to Vince. The day he called me, I think it was 2002, was the first time I had ever said a syllable to him since 1990, when I had met him for a brief moment.
Yeah.
And I was very excited and grateful for the fact that they could keep it quiet, because that was my biggest concern. I mean, I think I flew. I didn't
Who
even
knew about it?
Vince. Well, I guess I don't really know. I know obviously Vince did, Stephanie did, obviously legal. A couple people in legal did. Person.
What was going through your mind as you hugged Vince on stage that night?
I can tell you exactly. I said, Vince, that feeling in your feet right now are people. And I was looking at Hunter. I don't think I really talked to him that night, but I was watching him, and he didn't drink, and he was so in control of himself, and he was still having fun.
Right.
But while everybody else was kind of a little over the top by that time, I remember noticing, wow, this guy's really, he's having fun. He's sociable as hell, but he's not like everybody else. And that was really the last thing I remember about him. So many people, including certain friends of mine, by the way, who have talked about what they would have done with WCW or what really caused WCW's downfall, are all people that were never remotely close to the real core of the business side of the business and have no idea what they're talking about. But they've become a part of the narrative in a way that has made it so entrenched within the industry, the fan base, that people just really don't have any clue as to what really went on.